It's your Wednesday daily delivery. I am Michael Rand. Happy to be back for another day. Hope everybody out there is having a tremendous Wednesday. Terrific show coming up. Vikings poetry here in a little bit. The only proper way to express yourself after the Vikings improved to 12-2 this season. Can you believe they're 12-2? I cannot believe they're 12-2. I don't think a lot of people can believe they're 12-2, but that is their record. A lot in front of them right now. A lot of difficult games in front of them. It will not be easy from this point forward. As much as they've succeeded this season, from this point forward, every game will be a tough one, starting with Sunday against the Seahawks in Seattle. But they're in great shape right now. If they win out, they know they win the NFC North. They know they have a very good chance to claim home field advantage throughout the playoffs, things like that. So that's a big deal for them. We'll talk about that in Vikings poetry, and we'll certainly get into that more with Andrew Krammer in a little bit too as we review the film from the game and get to my 3 hot takeaways from the game as well. Some Timberwolves and Wild thoughts at the end of the show. Both those teams have big games coming up this week. First, though, what did I miss? Did you think I would start with anything other than Kirk Cousins getting benched? Can you believe it? And on top of 12-2 Vikings, Kirk Cousins is benched by the Falcons. This coming after a win, by the way. They won 15-9 also on Monday night. They played Monday in that second Monday night game, just like the Vikings did. Not a great game. He was 11 of 17, which, not terrible numbers, but didn't really move the ball. Threw a costly interception, couldn't get the ball moving on some key third downs. They didn't even try a first down pass in the entire first half of that game. A very conservative approach against a bad Raiders team. Almost caught him in the end, too. Almost bit him in the end because the Raiders scored a late touchdown, had the ball, were driving, but kind of ran out of time, ran out of opportunity. So the Falcons win, go to 7-7. The Tuesday morning news conference with Falcons head coach Raheem Morris, most of those, while Cousins has been struggling this season, have been basically, Kirk is still our guy. We know he's got to get better, but he's still our guy. I thought he's done some good things. We're going to win games with him. The Tuesday morning news conference after the game Monday night, in this case, was different. This was what Morris said Tuesday morning. This was the very first question he got asked Tuesday morning after the win.
I mean, we just got back, man. We still got to go through all that process like we always do. Obviously, getting back late last night, getting a big-time win. We talked about it last night, Zach. There's no secret. We didn't play well enough at the quarterback position, and we got to find ways to play better. So, all those things that go over the course of the week, and we got to do what's ever best to win versus the Giants.
So we heard that, and then there's all sorts of okay, that's different. So some rumblings, some speculation throughout the day. That's, that gets reported that, hey, the support that was there for Cousins feels like it's shifted. What's going to happen? Are they going to try Michael Penix Jr., the rookie they drafted 6 weeks after signing Cousins to that free agent contract? Lo and behold, they release a statement Tuesday night. Guess they didn't have to watch too much film or do too much determination because they released a statement from Morris on Tuesday night that says, quote, "After review, we have made the decision Michael Penix will be the Atlanta Falcons starting quarterback moving forward. This was a football decision, and we are fully focused on preparing the team for Sunday's game against the New York Giants." Kirk Cousins has not been benched in a decade. This has to be a shock to him, not so much because it wasn't earned. He's got 1 touchdown and 9 interceptions in his last 5 games, but because of where he thought he was with this franchise barely over 9 months ago, when he signed a 4-year, $180 million contract, which largely is basically a 2-year, $100 million contract, but is still a significant multi-year contract, the kind of thing the Vikings were not willing to give him, and as it turns out, for good reason. So the Falcons are paying him $62.5 million this season for what probably will amount to 14 weeks of subpar quarterback play. They're on the hook for $27.5 million next year unless they can trade him, and even if they can trade him, they're going to take a huge cap hit next year as well. If he's still on the roster, I think at the start of the league year, next year in a few months, he's guaranteed another $10 million from 2026. So what a mess they are in right now. It clearly seems like they are turning the page, moving forward to Penix, the quarterback they drafted. But Cousins still looming large over the franchise. He's going to cost them on their cap in 2025. Certainly, it's going to cost them a lot more money. Again, like I said, unless they can trade him. Probably worried about him getting injured at this point. You want to make sure you can trade him. You want to make sure that $10 million doesn't get guaranteed, stuff like that. So I'm curious where his headspace is right now. And if you are a Vikings fan, if you're a part of the Vikings organization, just more validation that they did the right thing. Like bringing Cousins back on a one-year deal this year wouldn't have been a disaster, right? Like it wouldn't have been a disaster. I think they've certainly made the right decision in going with Sam Darnold, cheaper, more cost-effective, things like that. But the thing that you got to remember is Cousins is already costing them like $28.5 million on their cap this season. So they're not really experiencing the cap savings for Cousins starting until next year. If they would have brought him back on a one-year deal, figured out a way to massage the cap, it probably would have been okay. Kevin O'Connell knows how to win with Kirk Cousins. He probably would have been having a better season here than he's having in Atlanta. Would he be having a better season than Sam Darnold? I don't think so, because I think Sam Darnold is doing things in this offense, is playing a certain way that I think they prefer, that they've had their eyes opened to both Cousins' limitations and what a slightly more mobile quarterback, maybe even more than slightly at this point in Cousins' career and Darnold's career, and big armed quarterback can do for what they want to do. So if they had signed him to the kind of contract that the Falcons ended up giving Kirk Cousins and done the same thing, drafted J.J. McCarthy like they did, what a disaster that would be. What a space they would be in right now where they'd be looking at cap jail again in 2025 like the Falcons are. So great decision by the Vikings. Puzzling decision from the jump from the Falcons, the way they went about this. I don't know if they got spooked when they finally got him in the building and saw how the Achilles injury was still affecting him, things like that. But this has just been an unmitigated disaster for the Falcons. And like I said, if you are a Vikings fan or if you are part of the organization, you cannot be happier with the decision you made and the way this all played out. Let's review the film from Monday night's game, a 30-12 win for the Vikings. Andrew Krammer, 12-2 on the season. And I think one thing you've got to appreciate about this team is they've been able to win kind of a lot of different ways this season. I don't think anybody would disagree that the defense is the best side of the ball, but there's been the flavors of victory this year have kind of run the gamut. And this was one where it kind of felt like it was fairly complimentary, even if it was maybe tilted towards the defense.
Yeah, and I think the offense especially has found ways to just move the ball and put up enough points in different ways, because it was just a week removed from them going berserk. And, the aerial show against the Falcons with all those deep passes, and this was not it. The Bears came into this one much like they tried to do in that first matchup at Soldier Field and tried to take away the deep ball. They did a good job of limiting Justin Jefferson in that first game. And in this game, they just did a better job of backing up entirely on all sides of the field and trying to take away the long ones. And there were some more opportunities that Sam Darnold just missed. He wasn't the most accurate in this game, but you could also tell that, and Kevin O'Connell said this after the game, the Vikings were just willing to take the run that the Bears were willing to give. The Bears backed up so far that you could just hand the ball off against 6 guys in the box, 7 guys in the box here. It was also good coaching and scheme to spring Aaron Jones for some of those runs. And then Aaron is obviously just playing very, very well. So I think to your point about winning in different ways, to me, it stood out with how different the offense had to win from against Atlanta, where it just seemed so easy with the big plays, to against Chicago, where it was much more of a let's kind of methodically piece together some possessions here. And just looking at their scoring drives, the Vikings put together drives of 15 plays, 13 plays, 12 plays. That's not typically how they've done things this year. No. They've been a very big play offense. So I think that's probably got to be the most encouraging thing for O'Connell. And then obviously the defense, they played so much better than they did that last game against Caleb Williams. And we can talk about how much of that was them and how much of that was Caleb and the Bears. Well,
yeah. And they didn't have the benefit of cornerbacks who were on the Falcons last week who looked like they had been put on the field directly after being on a spinning merry-go-round. Like those guys were just like dizzy and twirling around like nothing. Like the Bears corners were certainly better. And then strategically, you're right. It was just a much different approach. I'm glad you mentioned Aaron Jones, because that leads right into hot takeaway number one. I feel like he's changed. He's reversed the narrative, right? Like 3 weeks ago, it was like, Aaron Jones has a fumbling problem. Aaron Jones, what are they going to do about Aaron Jones? And we're not saying it's solved. I'm not trying to jinx him, but I don't feel like we're talking about that anymore.
No, nor are we talking about his injuries, or is this guy going to hold up? It's been a little Wolverine-like, the way that he bounced back from a hamstring injury early in the season, where everyone's like, oh, hamstrings are a death knell. That's going to be awful. And then he just bounced back the next week. And then the rib injury that did lead into 3 fumbles in 3 straight games. But you're right. Since then, he's held onto the ball tightly, hasn't had any issues with even drop passes or losing possession, even out of bounds. So it seems like he's fixed that. And that's been his MO throughout his career. That is kind of what we should expect from him, and that's why those fumbles were so shocking. But the biggest thing too is just his health, his availability. For them to ride Aaron the way that they did in this game, I think it was 20 to 18 carries, 2 catches, another 20 touch game for him. To keep doing that in December, in a game that you were winning pretty handedly and maybe didn't need to lean on him that much. Could have had more Cam Akers or Ty Chandler, who had just 1 snap on offense in this game. They're still leaning on him, and he's still healthy and playing out there. So that's a great sign for this team's longevity when you see players across the league dropping like flies.
Number 2, Andrew, I'm still very much concerned about the interior of the offensive line. They feel like that's where the pressure was coming from a lot Monday, even though there were big stretches of that game where they were playing with 2 replacement tackles, and maybe some of that is those guys get more help, so you're kind of hoping that your regulars hold up on the interior. But it seems like the pressure, even without the blitz, and then when the Bears sent 7 at Darnold one time, it was like it feels like they have no chance when teams overload up the middle, that it just gets messy really quick. I thought Darnold did a good job of getting rid of some balls in this game, even if they were just incompletions and not taking as many sacks as he has, escaping enough or just throwing it away quickly. But that interior pressure still worries me.
Yeah, I wouldn't be shocked if they're looking at 2 new guards next year. I think Blake Brandel, his experiment here at left guard, it hasn't been talked about because of the issues on the right side with Ed Ingram getting replaced by Dalton Reisner. Who knows the future with Garrett Bradbury? I think they appreciate a lot of what he does, but in terms of setting the table for their pass protections and seeing things and communicating, but physically he's obviously not the most imposing center. So yeah, you saw the overmatched way that the Bears were able to just overpower them, whether it was Eddie Goldman, who was a familiar foe, or I think it was Dominique Robinson was a guy who had 4 hits in that game. Just a lot of different ways that they were able to pressure them up the middle. And I think when you looked at some of the twists and movement, the Bears like to move guys up front a lot. They like to run a lot of different stunts and games. And that's the kind of stuff where you need guards who see the field well, react well, anticipate that kind of stuff. And I don't think Brandel does that very well. Reisner does. He's seen a lot more. He's played a lot more. He was more consistent in this game, but I thought Brandel had another rough one. And that just goes to show you that, look, they already benched their right guard. Their left guard keeps kind of having these ups and downs. It might be a situation where they're buying a free agent guard come March and then just competing for a new starter in camp next year on the other side.
And it makes it that much more critical that it seems like O'Neal escaped without any serious injury. I mean, you guys were reporting on that after the game.
Yeah, we ended up talking to him after the game, and he said everything checked out with the x-rays. They were negative. He said everything structurally is okay. He's probably going to go in for an MRI today, if not already at this point on Tuesday morning, and that will determine, what the practice or recovery timeline is going to be for him or outlook for him. But he seemed to think, because I'd asked him, there's no concern this is going to swell up on you overnight and you're going to be out for a long time. And he said, no, generally I can tell these things. He doesn't seem like it's going to be a JJ McCarthy situation where he comes in the next day and out for the year. So this was something where they feel like they got it under control, whatever it is. And then we'll get more information on that today.
All right. Final hot takeaway. Looking at the data, the odds, it still says Lions 75% chance to win the division. Obviously, it's even though they're tied right now in the division race, you've got the Lions with, the home game against the Vikings, the easier schedule, generally considered a tougher team just based on the way they've played this year. So all those factors coming into play. I think it's closer to a coin flip at this point, just because of all the defensive injuries that the Lions have suffered. I'm not banking 2 wins for the Lions, even though they only have the Bears and the 49ers. I think part of the reason you have to be a little skeptical of the Vikings is that there's certainly no guarantee they're going to beat the Seahawks and the Packers before they get to the Lions. A much different stretch. I'd be a little bit surprised, but I would not be shocked to see Detroit go into San Francisco and lose just because of how banged up their defense is right now.
That would be interesting. Yeah. If they get, who's running the ball for them? Isaac Guerrero at this point. I'm trying to think of who's even at running back at San Francisco. But if Brock Purdy can have a better game than he had against the Rams in bad conditions last Thursday, and if they can move the ball, you're right, because Detroit is going to have to win these shootouts, and they're still set up to do that. Their offensive line is still fairly healthy. Jahmyr Gibbs, this Montgomery injury is a huge one, but if Jahmyr Gibbs can handle, and if he's fresh enough to handle 20-plus touches a game, it might be worse news for the Vikings, because that's the better, more dynamic running back.
Right.
So I think Detroit's still set up to win shootouts, but you're right. It's going to have to be shootouts, because that defense, man, it's losing Alan McNeil. He's one of the best interior defenders, got paid close to, if not more than $20 million a year this last offseason, and he was earning it. And that is where the Vikings, as we just talked about, are pretty weak in terms of the interior protection and run blocking and all that. So them losing McNeil was huge, because you bring in guys like Zadarius Smith, they bring in other free agents to try and help, but you're not going to replace that guy. So I do think Detroit has an easier schedule, as you mentioned.
For sure.
Wouldn't be a shock if they won these next 2 games, but it puts a ton of pressure on the Vikings to continue winning if they want to chase this number 1 overall seed, which it's incredible we're talking about that this is even in play. I probably wouldn't feel like it's in play if Detroit were fully healthy, but the fact that the fact that Detroit seems vulnerable, Mike, this isn't too spicy of a take. I wouldn't call it a coin flip just because of the schedules, and I need to see Minnesota, host Green Bay and beat a Green Bay team that's looking pretty good right now.
Yes, I agree.
That's probably the biggest question mark for me on the Vikings schedule before you get into that Detroit game. But yeah, I wouldn't call it quite a coin flip, but hey, it's out there, it's possible, and that's incredible that we're even talking about that.
The complication with if they both lose a game before they play each other in week 18 too is that Philadelphia could very easily run the table, go 15-2, and then the 2 seed isn't nearly as enticing as the 1 seed. I mean, there's a pretty big difference between the 2 and the 1 now that there's only the 1 bye. You got to play 3 games. You're not guaranteed to have all of them at home. I mean, the first 2 would be at home, but the 1 seed and the 2 seed used to be fairly comparable when they were both buys, and now that's a big difference. So you can't afford to slip up from that standpoint just as much as you can't imagine that it's going to be easy to think Detroit loses one of these games and you have wiggle room there.
Yeah, and I'm sure you've talked about this, but winning out is no guarantee for the 1 seed either, because Philadelphia could still win based on a strength of victory tiebreaker, which has so many different permutations to it in terms of whose non-common opponents win or lose the most on the way out. It seems like, just based on me, because I went through the ESPN playoff machine, tried to punch in all losses for Vikings common opponents, and it seemed like the Vikings held that tiebreaker pretty firmly. It took until like week 17 or 18 of like all the Colts losses and all these other teams that the Vikings had played losing for the Eagles to win that 15-2 tiebreaker, but it's possible. So it's not a total guarantee the Vikings win out for number 1. And yeah, as you said, the easiest way is just to keep winning out and not have to hope for other teams to lose.
Yeah. You mentioned at the beginning, let's transition to the defense against Caleb Williams was much better this go around. They limited him in, what he wanted to do, kind of contained him better. He still escaped a few times, but it wasn't like he was making big plays generally off of the escapes. He was having to throw it away or do like a modest scramble. Was this a regression from Caleb Williams, a better game plan and understanding for how to defend him? What did you think that was?
Yeah, I think it was both. I think Caleb Williams was bad, and obviously, if you watch the game last night, you can be like, "Yeah, no, I saw that." But when you watch even just the third play, the opening 3rd and 2, it was inexplicable how bad he was. Because I thought after the game, my initial impression was, boy, their coaching is bad. This kid looks lost. They're not doing anything for him. But this was the opening 3rd and 2. And albeit they go empty backfield, which questionable on 3rd and 2. Why would you get rid of your running back and tell the defense this is going to be a pass? You know what's coming. But they got a lot of good playmakers. They got DJ Moore, who ends up motioning out to one side into a screen. They have Keenan Allen, who's running a little hook or kind of crossing pattern from the opposite side of the field. The Vikings play deep. They kind of give a lot of space in the middle as they're wont to do. And Keenan Allen comes open across a dropping Jonathan Grenard. Caleb Williams looks right past him. Caleb never looks to the screen to DJ Moore to his right, even though he's got the numbers. The Vikings, again, are playing off, and they've got just 2 people for 2 blockers and a runner on one side. And then Caleb, without facing any pressure, because the Vikings, their whole approach was like, we're not going to worry about their O-line. If we talk about the Vikings O-line being bad, the Bears O-line is so bad.
It's a mess.
They were obviously starting their backup left tackle, which didn't go well with Jonathan Grenard, but they weren't even rushing Grenard on this 3rd down. They dropped him. The left tackle didn't have to do anything. There was no pressure because the Vikings approach was, we're just going to sit back, keep Caleb in the pocket, see what he does, and bet that he's not going to make the right decision, and bet that we're going to generate enough pressure just kind of slowly rushing up there. There was no pressure. Caleb started to scramble on 3rd down for no reason. Eschews and looks past 2 different open targets and then gains 1 yard on a scramble that sets up the failed 4th and 1. That was the 3rd play of the game for him. Like, there's no reason for him to be spooked by pressure at that point or anything going wrong at that point. That was just him playing bad. He came into this game playing bad. And then later on, the coaching decisions, they continued to put it on him. They continued to go empty. They continued to ask him to throw on 1st and 10, again, from empty backfields with no threat of the run, all while DeAndre Swift had gained 80 yards in this game and had picked up 4 yards a run. It's not like he wasn't running well. So I did not understand both the approach. I didn't understand Caleb Williams and some of the decisions he was making. And I thought Brian Flores and the Vikings learned how to better contain his scrambling, which did hurt them. And not only that, they also covered better on the back end. I feel like by mixing up the coverages, by going to man more, they went to man coverage more on 3rd down, which I think it didn't give Caleb the kind of open windows he was comfortable throwing into. So there were some throwaways, there were some runs to nowhere that he had. Just overall, I think it was a better performance of the Vikings defense and a much worse performance by the Bears overall.
I think that's fair. And one thing that stood out, and pardon me if we've emphasized this and stuff that we've written, I just couldn't remember talking about this at all, but I think ESPN flashed a graphic during the game that on 1st and 2nd down, the Vikings have blitzed like 43% of the time this season, like number 1 in the league. On 3rd down, the blitz rate goes down to like 28%, which is like 21st or 22nd in the league. So they're really playing a lot of more coverage on 3rd down than most teams. It's an interesting kind of strategy that Flores is employing. And I think against someone like Caleb Williams, that was probably pretty effective.
Well, I think overall that they were very picky and choosy with when they sent their pressures. They showed it all the time. They didn't necessarily send it. And there were some 3rd downs early in that game where they did send it. And it's funny because we've had this back and forth with Brian Flores before where he's like, well, what do you call a blitz? Because you guys say I blitz this much, but I think I blitz this much. And his definition of a blitz is a lot more liberal than ours. He will call a 4-man rush a blitz if, like what happened on 1st and 10 in one of these plays I'm talking about where Caleb just ran to nowhere and threw it away. It was a 4-man rush where they dropped the edges. They dropped both Grenard and Dallas Turner at the time, and they blitz Metellus and Cashman up the middle like they're Anthony Barr and Eric Kendricks, and they do a little twist and get immediate pressure up the middle. That's just a 4-man rush. ESPN might not be calling that a blitz. It's absolutely a blitz. So that's the thing where like the Vikings are even more aggressive than the numbers want to show or dictate because they will do these fire zones. They will do these 3 4-man rushes that still simulate stress on an offensive line by overloading one part of it while also putting 7 or 8 people in coverage. That's what makes the mad scientist mind of Brian Flores so dangerous, and that's why a lot of the great defenses in today's league are doing this kind of stuff, because it's multiple, it confuses quarterbacks, and it's not ever the same. And so you talk about they do have a more aggressive approach on earlier downs, and I do wonder if that lower blitz rate, quote unquote, on third down has to do with the fact that they are getting teams in these longer third down scenarios where you can just probably drop back and play coverage, and it seems to work sometimes.
Now, all this said, during this 7-game winning streak, they have not exactly faced a murderer's row of quarterbacks. I mean, was Kyler Murray the best one they played in this 7-game stretch? I mean, it depends on who you like more, Murray or 36-year-old Kirk Cousins. I mean,
no, not Kirk. I would say first version of Caleb Williams.
Right. But
the fourth quarter, fourth quarter version of Caleb Williams in that first Chicago game was like, whoa, this is it. This is like, what you could see being a headache for the Vikings for years to come, or the entire division. He just was not that really much at all. There was a couple plays he flashed that on Monday night, but you did not see it. He didn't look comfortable. So you're right. I think it was Kyler Murray, and the Vikings won that Arizona game by just keeping him out of the end zone.
Right.
They only could throw the one touchdown to Marvin Harrison when Fabian Moreau got into the game. So yeah, they haven't played a ton of good quarterbacks in this stretch, certainly. I don't even think this season they've played. I mean, I guess the opening stretch of Purdy, Stroud, Jordan Love, Goff, right, and then into Stafford. Yeah. So since the beginning of the season, they have not played a ton of good quarterbacks. No.
And that's changing. I mean, Seattle is optimistic. It's easy to be optimistic early in the week that Geno Smith might play Sunday, that he maybe escaped serious injury, no structural damage, stuff like that. And they need that game in a bad way. So if he's close to being able to go, I bet they run him out there. And then, of course, you got Jordan Love again, and then Jared Goff again. Like they're going to be tested differently by the quarterbacks in these last 3 games, particularly the last 2 games, than they have been in these most recent 7, generally speaking.
Yeah, and the Seattle injury I'm looking for is Ken Walker. He's one of the best running backs in football when he's healthy, and he has not been available for them the last couple games. Zach Charbonnet is their replacement. He's plenty good too, but when they have both of those guys, that's when that Seattle offense is at its best. And obviously, Seattle has not played well recently. I think Arizona kept them down quite a bit, and then in this last week, didn't they lose this last week? What did they do this last week?
Well, that's the Packers, because
that's right.
Was hurt. Yeah,
that's right. They got just demolished. Josh Jacobs went nuts in that first half. So I imagine Aaron Jones is watching that, saying, "I can do that against Seattle." It's just a matter of if Seattle has their own run game going, Ivan Pace is still not going to be able to be back. I thought the Vikings run defense played better for the most part against Chicago, but Chicago's just not a great rushing team, nor did they really lean into it in this game, not maybe until it was too late in the second half. So I think that's the concern I have for this matchup. And you would imagine they're going to push Geno out there, because the Rams are obviously, I think, in the driver's seat now of that division, and Seattle's going to need every win they can get.
They are indeed. Well, they're all big now in December, going into January, even for the end of the regular season. We'll see how it all shakes out. Andrew, appreciate it as always. We will talk to you again soon.
Sounds good, Mike. Thanks.
Great stuff from Andrew. One thing we didn't get to is the health of Stephon Gilmore. I think he was close last week. He should be closer this week. Will be interesting to see if he plays against the Seahawks or if he needs one more week. Obviously, his health in the playoffs is paramount to their success. His health against the Packers and the Lions is paramount to their success in those games. Will they put him out there against the Seahawks? Obviously, if he's ready to go, he'll play. He's missed a couple games here. They've gotten by without him. I think they've done a pretty good job in the secondary, actually better than I thought they would. But his health looms large over this season. It has ever since he went down with that injury. We'll see if he is available for that Seattle game and beyond.
Watch your dreams and savings grow with Royal Credit Union's 4.25% annual percentage yield 12-month certificate. Open now at any Royal office or online at rcu.org/certificate saver. Early withdrawal penalties could reduce earnings and principal. APY accurate as of 2/1/25. Insured by NCUA.
It's Vikings poetry time on a Wednesday, a little different, but of course the Monday night game necessitates that. Keith Rashat is with me graciously. Did you watch all of that game, or how did you watch the Monday games?
Well, first of all, let me just apologize to whoever I bumped in the Wednesday slot. I realize how difficult and traumatic that can be when you're not part of the regular rotation.
As a bumping survivor yourself.
That's right. That's right. So, but I did. I got to watch it with the new time zone that I live in. It's at a reasonable hour, and so I watched that silly thing.
It was a good enough game, right? Like it was,
Well, then let me give you the first poem so we can talk about it.
Please do. I would love nothing more than that.
Lacking in sizzle, mostly just consistency, workmanlike effort.
It's about how you describe it, right? Would have liked.
That was how I described it.
I would have liked you to. If this was a rhyming verse, you could have used a faux shizzle in there, but that's just me. It was.
Do you not have enough Snoop Dogg in your life? Is he not in enough commercials or TV shows for you?
Between him and Jason Kelsey, I don't know who is in more ads right now. Jason Kelsey is just like, sure, I'll do a Courtyard by Marriott ad. Sure, I'll do every other ad, and whatever you want, I'll do one. I'll do the Cars for Kids ad. I'll do whatever you want. But yeah,
we got two spokespeople in the world.
Yep, just those two. But you're right. It was. I never felt like it was like really in doubt, but they didn't ever like until the end. They didn't like put it away, right? Like it would have been nice if they could have gotten like one more. If they could have just come out in the third quarter and scored a touchdown on that first possession and made it 20-0, and they could have just relaxed a little bit more. But 30-12 ultimately is a nice win, I would say. Workmanlike.
What it reminds me of is you know how. You might develop a friendship with somebody in college or something like that, and they're from a different place or a different state or whatever, and then you decide to you make arrangements and you decide to go visit them and hang out for a little while in their part of the world, right? Okay. And so then you go to visit them wherever they're at, and you're hanging out or whatever, and you're going to go to a concert or a party or whatever the thing is. And it's like, oh, how are we going to get there? And your friend says, oh, my cousin Cletus is going to drive us. And you're like, your cousin Cletus? Okay. All right. So Cletus picks you up in a car.
Where are you
just
going
shut
with
up.
this?
Let me tell it. Just shut up.
Right.
Let me express myself.
Okay.
Right? You already pushed me to another day. Just let me express myself.
Okay, go on.
So, you get in the car with cousin Cletus. You don't know this person. You don't know what they're all about. And so all of a sudden they go zipping off and they feel like they're going 100 miles an hour. And all of a sudden they dart down this crazy road or that crazy road. And you're sitting there in the car and you're wondering, like, does this feel right? Is this good? I'm like, are we actually going to get to where we want to be? Like, this feels a little bit dangerous or weird, or I'm unsure here. Okay. But then eventually, much sooner than you would expect, you see off in the horizon the destination where you want to go, and then you've got there safely and you're where you want to be. And then you sit there and you think to yourself, okay, I guess cousin Cletus knew what he was doing. I guess he knew where he was going, and we ended up where we wanted to be. And even though I had some discomfort during the journey, even though things felt a little weird or off kilter at first, right, they ended up where it is that they needed to be. And so it was with that Vikings game last night that they ended up where they needed to be. There were times early on where, exactly like you said, boy, I wish things, if things had gone just a little bit better, if they had executed on this or that play or what have you, it might have felt a lot easier from the beginning. But in the long run, they scored 30 points. They held the Bears to 12 points. It was exactly what you wanted it to be.
From now on, this type of
Do not interrupt me ever again. I nailed that one.
From this point on, that type of Vikings win, or maybe any type of win that's kind of like that, will be referred to as a cousin Cletus victory.
That's right.
Poem 2, please.
Vanilla Ice played. Biggest fan in attendance? Yep, John Marthaler.
That's right. John was at that game. Good for him.
If anybody loves Vanilla Ice, We have heard it over the years and
man.
years. Just
John
nothing
loves,
about
nothing
talk.
loves. Yes.
He just loves Vanilla Ice. And so
He
I was so happy for him.
does.
So happy for John that he got to see Vanilla Ice in concert at
I
that
know.
game.
I heard there was like some microphone problems, so I hope that didn't ruin it for John, the world's foremost Vanilla Ice fan.
At least they're in the same building.
Are you going to address the uniforms at some point, or should I talk about that here?
You can talk about that here because, my goodness, they were blindingly white.
I didn't care. I didn't hate them. They looked a little stormtrooper-ish. My issue with them, which I started to form this opinion Wednesday when I was at their practice, and some of them had the helmets on. They were like testing them out at practice. You could barely see the horn on the helmet. It was not defined enough. It wasn't Vikings enough for me. But at least the uniforms didn't like cost them the game or something. They still won in their special whiteout uniforms.
The helmets should be purple. I think we could just leave it at that.
Or at least white with a big blob of purple in the middle somewhere. It was too much. It looked like someone said on Twitter that it looked like the helmets looked like a coloring book. The whole thing looked like a coloring book, and I think that's fair.
You know what? Yeah, actually, yes.
I think that's fair. All right, poem 3, please.
Heed the old adage: someone always has it worse. The Bears are awful,
and it's weird because, like, you go back and like some of this was smoke and mirrors at the beginning of the year, but they were 4-2. Like even before the year started, you looked at the core and you're like, man, they got a lot of playmakers on offense. Number 1 overall pick as a quarterback. Yeah, it might take him a little while to figure this out, but he's like projected to be this like kind of generational talent. The defense has always been pretty good. You're like, the Bears might actually kind of have it figured out, and they're 4-2. They're one play away from going 5-2, and then that cornerback goes and gets mouthy with the fans, doesn't understand that there's a Hail Mary that's coming, and they lose to Washington, and they have not won since then. They're now 4-10. They were 4-2 on the verge of 5-2. And a lot of those games along the way were close, but man, it does seem like if all the fight hasn't been drained out of them, enough of it has been drained out of them at this point. And some of it is just, they're not that good. You're right.
Every time I drive by somebody's on the side of the road with flat tire and smoke pouring out of the hood or whatever, I turn to my son and I say, it's another reminder, somebody always is having a worse day than you are, right?
Yeah.
And it's something that is worth keeping in mind all the time, particularly because it does sort of feel like over the course of a 12-2 season, we have heard a lot of complaining about this team. Right.
Yes.
For a team that has 12 wins,
12-2
with 3 games to go, right? There's been a lot of complaining. And we talked about last time that they played the Bears. They had better not make the right coaching hire. They had better screw that up again, because if somebody sets Caleb Williams straight, that is going to be a problem for a very long time. Right. The kid clearly has some raw talent, is not really in a space where he wants to get rid of the ball in a proper amount of time right now.
No.
But if he gets that figured out, if they make the right coaching, it's going to be bad. But right now, it has to be just awful in Chicago because that team has killed itself. And then like the Thanksgiving game where they didn't call the timeout. And then the Hail Mary play that you mentioned, right?
Yeah.
It has to be just an utterly painful year. And so anybody who, and I don't think that there's too many people right now, but anybody who's still complaining or is grumpy about that win because it wasn't aesthetically pleasing enough needs to shut up and gain some perspective about where we're at with a team that, again, I will remind you, the experts thought was going to be maybe a 7-win team.
Maybe. Not just the experts, the data. The data said 7 wins, and now they have 12. And you're right. People are like, Vikings, I want you to win. But not like that. Could you win a different way? Could you do it a little bit differently with a little bit more panache? And they're just like, we're just going to keep winning. Like, what have they won? Like 7 in a row now? They've had a 5-game winning streak and a 7-game winning streak this season so far. If they win the rest of their games, they will win the division. They will almost certainly be the number 1 seed. Will people complain about that?
About that.
Oh,
there's a poem.
Good.
Let's talk about that. a glimmer of hope. The mountaintop is in sight. The schedule's tough, though.
Yep, you're right. I mean, Vikings, Lions, and Eagles are all 12-2. Lions, though, have, I think, Chicago and San Francisco. Both of those are road games, but you would imagine, even though 87 of their players on defense are hurt, that they'll be able to win those games. And then the Vikings
it's
got to
only
go.
87? That feels low.
Just
from what I've been
87.
hearing.
And I think the Eagles have kind of an easy path, too. But, yeah, the Vikings have a tough path. They got to win at Seattle, which, if Geno Smith, we'll see what Geno Smith's health is like, but even regardless, they've never done well there. It's just a hard place for them to go and win. And then they got to be here against Green Bay, and Green Bay is good. We can say that. Green Bay is good. And then they got to go to Detroit. So running the table is harder for them than the other two teams. I agree with that. But the window's open now because Detroit gave up, 48 points and 550 yards to Buffalo. They're so determined that they can't make a stop on defense that they try an onside kick down 10 with 11 minutes left. That's how bad their defense is right now.
All right. So if you're a Vikings fan, here's what you can be grumpy about. All right. You cannot be grumpy about this team and the results, particularly because last night was another display of how they don't necessarily need one player to do everything for them, right? Sam Darnold had a good game, not the same spectacular game he had against the Falcons, right?
Yes.
The defense played well, so it's not as if you need one player to always show up for you.
Right.
So you can't be grumpy if you're a Vikings fan about the team itself, but what you can be grumpy about is the fact that the Vikings play in what might be the toughest division in football perhaps ever.
Yes.
Right? Green Bay is clearly the third place team in this division. Right. And of their 4 losses, the combined record of the teams that they've lost to is something like what is a bajillion to 5 losses or something like that. They've lost to the Lions, they lost to the Eagles, they've lost to the Vikings. Those are the only teams, if I'm not mistaken, that they've lost to. Right? That's the third place team in the division. Right? That's number 3, for heaven's sake. And the Lions did their part by finally losing and allowing the Vikings a chance if they do what they need to do to make sure that Week 18 game is what it is. Right. But if you really want to be mad about something, it's the fact that the Eagles might be able to coast their way to a number 1 seed because they get to play the Giants and the Cowboys and what's the other atrocious team in that stupid division?
Well, Washington is still in that division. Washington's okay.
Washington's okay. Yeah, they're okay. But you want to talk about the difference between the Packers as a third place team and Washington as a second place team. Packers are still vastly superior to Washington right now. And so if you want to be mad about anything, it's that the path has been laid out for Philadelphia because they do not have to play in what is the hardest division perhaps ever in football. And so that, the idea of going to another NFC championship game in Philadelphia does not hold a lot of appeal. And I hate that team so much.
Yeah, I agree with that. And as in fact, I was just looking up their schedule. Those are, in fact, their final 3 games. It's at Washington next week. So that's a possibility, right? Washington is pretty secure in a wild card spot right now. I think they're 9-5. By the way, I saw a stat the other day. I think I was at the gym just watching one of those highlight shows. It said Washington's 9-5 record is their best record through 14 games since 1992. That's a tough one, right? That's a tough one.
It's been 92.
It's been a tough 32 years for Washington Commanders football. If that's it's a good record, but that shouldn't be your best record through 14 games in the last 32 years.
Yeah, probably not. And but as you were saying, that is the best chance to hope for another loss for this Eagles team.
Well, yeah, because the last 2 are home against Dallas and home against the Giants. There's like Dallas, maybe they give them a game. The Giants are so completely checked out that do not have any hope for Week 18. That's just not good. So yeah, we'll see. We'll see. I mean, if the Vikings win out, we kind of looked at the tiebreakers. They're in pretty good shape with all the tiebreakers against Philadelphia. So if they win out, very good chance at the 1 seed. But I think you're right. It's a very tough path for them, a tougher path for them than it is for Detroit or Philadelphia for sure.
That sucks.
You know, if you've watched enough Vikings games over the years, you've known to expect the letdown game, right? Expect the loss right when you start to believe or right when you start to think that things are different. That's, I think, what made Monday's game impressive to me. It's not that they beat the Bears, who are a bad team. It's that they went in, didn't play like the greatest game or the most efficient game, but they won 30-12. They took care of business. At no point in that game did I feel like they were really in danger of losing. Like Keith and I talked about, there could have been moments where you wanted them to exert their will sooner or make a play that gave them a little bit more comfort, but it was a slow ascent. It was a slow kind of like build up to that final score, and there was no letdown in that game. Again, not a perfect game. They made some mistakes. They did some things they probably would like to have back, but no team is going to play a perfect game. The effort, the focus, it was there from the start. Even some stuff late, like Trent Sherfield made a play when they're trying to grind out the clock towards the end of the game where he's fighting for a first down, just giving them a little extra comfort, making sure the Bears have no wiggle room for a comeback, things like that. Like that was start to finish focus that I think was impressive, that we just haven't always seen, sometimes more so than others, throughout Vikings history. Let's finish quickly with the cooler. Big games coming up for the Wild and the Timberwolves. Wild tonight against Florida, defending Stanley Cup champions, maybe catching them at a pretty good time. They've been a little bit struggling lately. The Wild, a little bit banged up right now, too, so maybe two teams with great records, some decent pedigrees right now, but maybe not at the peak of their games, but a good chance for the Wild to pick up an impressive win tonight. Then, of course, the Wolves tomorrow against the Knicks. You don't want to make too much of it. It's just one regular season game, but man, when Karl-Anthony Towns comes back into the building, there will be some emotions. There will be some trade judgment based on the 48 minutes that happens here. Tom Thibodeau comes back with the Knicks as well. Plenty of storylines in this game. Julius Randle, Dante DiVincenzo. Remember, they played in New York like almost immediately after the trade because they were part of the preseason schedule. But this is the first regular season meeting since the trade. I will be watching tomorrow night for sure, and I'm sure a lot of you will be as well. That will do it for me today. Hope you guys enjoyed today's show. Lavelle E. Neal III expected to join me on tomorrow's show. Access Vikings podcast expected later today as well, so listen for that. Until then, I am Michael Rand. We will talk to you later.